So let's just double check to make sure we're hearing stuff from the chat. Chat, can you hear us? How is the sound volume and stuff? There's always a little bit of a lag between. Okay. I think we're good to go. Is the live stream appearing on your end, John?
I don't have it open. I have the chat is popped out. So.
Oh, nice. That's handy.
Yeah. That way I won't see what I looked like 3 seconds ago.
Oh, sick.
Ali, it's working.
It's working. Fantastic.
There we go.
All right. Hello, John. Welcome to the YouTube channel. How are you doing today on this fine day?
Good. I'm doing well. It is snowing in May.
No, it's
in Wisconsin.
It's snowing at your
in
end.
the United. Yeah, it's snowing a little bit.
Oh my goodness, that's absolutely mental. It's been like super sunny here for the last few days, and now it's a little bit overcast, a little bit rainy. But it's been good, like lighting to film videos, because it's really annoying filming them when it's broad daylight. I have to close the curtains, but this is such a nice kind of overcast.
That gives you such a different perspective on the weather. You know, it's not just how do I feel? Is it pleasant? You know, you're also thinking about how will I look on the camera.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wonder if we can just kick things off. I've got a lot of questions for you about like your career and kind of how you got where you are. But I wonder for the people in the 485 people who are watching, some of whom might not know your story. I wonder if you could just kind of give us an overview of like your career to date and kind of what you're doing now and kind of the journey as you went through it.
Sure. My background is about 15 years as a designer for technology companies. So designing software products, apps, websites, marketing, all sorts of different things. And I kind of got into it on accident. I wanted to be an engineer growing up. And then when I got into university, realized that it seemed a lot less fun than I imagined it was going to be. And after sort of stumbling around for a bit, I realized that I really enjoyed the design part of things. I enjoyed figuring things out and kind of tinkering with, you know, at the time this was learning HTML and CSS and figuring out how to put web pages together and stuff. So I got into that, and I was at a startup in Chicago that was acquired by Google. And so again, accidentally found myself now inside Google, this huge company, and worked there for about 10 years. I worked at YouTube, and I worked at Google Ventures, which is the VC firm that's funded by Google. And that was really where like things started to click for me, because I got to go from team to team to team. So after we made an investment in a startup, I would go inside that startup, sort of like a consultant. And so I got to see a lot of patterns for things that people did well or people struggled with when it came not just to design and to decision making and strategy, but also just to like how people spend time together, you know, the processes that they use, the sort of the frameworks that they use to collaborate together. And so that led me to what I'm doing now, which is sort of working toward this mission of helping people make good use of their time. And so I've written a couple books about that. The first is Sprint, which is about the 5-day design sprint process that I helped to create when I was at Google Ventures. And the second is Make Time, which is all about this kind of daily framework. Yeah, almost like your operating system for day to day. Like, how do you choose what to focus on? And yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, that's kind of the background. That's what I'm doing now. And I guess I'm still kind of, I feel really good about the mission, but there's so many different ways of pursuing that mission. There's a lot of different opportunities. And so I've kind of been focused on one now for the last couple of years, but I'm always thinking about, you know, what are other ways that I could help people with this. And so, you know, as a generalist, as a person who likes to tinker and figure things out, I'm always experimenting with new and different projects and opportunities.
Ah, okay. So one thing that I'm curious about, just kind of from the outset, like, how do you figure out what your kind of mission is? Because this is something that I find like really hard. I've recently been reading Michael Hyatt's The Vision-Driven Leader, and it talks about how when you're kind of leading a team, which is now what I've started to do with kind of the team surrounding the YouTube channel, you've got to have this vision and you've got to have this kind of a broad overarching purpose. And then David Allen in Getting Things Done talks about having your kind of vision and kind of the 30,000 foot view and different horizons of focus. But I always kind of think that I don't really know what my vision is. Like, how do you go about figuring that out? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, the first thoughts are that I think a mission and a vision are very different. A mission is the underlying why. It's sort of what is the why do I care about this, and really high level, what change do I want to see? How do I want the world to be different as a result of my work? I think that the next sort of layer below that is opportunities. You take my mission, for example, which is to help people make time for what matters. Like there's a lot of ways to do that. I could do what I'm doing now, which is kind of giving people frameworks and processes, but I could also teach them about money and how to use their money to buy time. I could also, approach it as an investor. I could invest in companies or in teams and help so that they have time to focus on something that's really important. And then I think from those opportunities stems the vision. And the vision is exactly what it sounds like. It's a picture. It's a mental picture of specifically what would that look like if I did that, if I pursued that opportunity and I was successful, what is that like? So I think vision is helpful because you can visualize it, because it's crisp in that way, and you can, because it's kind of solution oriented, it's easy to think about, well, what would that look like and what would I do to get there? But I think it's worth spending a bit of time to try to figure out what the underlying mission is, like why. And there's, I won't pretend to have any great answers about this, and it's something I'm still struggling with and learning about. And there has been a lot of great writing about, that idea of why and the idea of mission. But for me, it came from, I should say it has always come from having space. So I have found that when I am like super busy, and I went through a phase where I was super into like productivity optimization, sort of like the ultra efficient, like no, there should be no wasted minutes. Like if I'm walking down the street, I need to be listening to a podcast. It's like everything has to be, used in some sort of optimal way.
Oh, mate, that's basically the story of my life. I think, I can't be doing anything unless I'm listening to a podcast at double speed. But I kind of feel that maybe this isn't necessarily a good kind of long-term strategy.
Well, that's a really good way to put it, because I think short term, it is a good strategy. But yeah, long term, maybe it's not, because I have found personally, and I think there's probably some other evidence to support this, that when I have been in those periods, I have been very fixated on what's in front of me, but maybe I don't have as great of a sense of what my longer term mission or what that vision is. And when I've gone through periods where I have space in my life, in my days, whether that's on the micro level of having hours that are not filled with anything, or on a macro level, for example, my wife and I did some extended travel after we left San Francisco and ended up moving to Wisconsin, where I live now. Just kind of having like unscheduled time to sort of do nothing. For me, that's always been where a lot of those thoughts about mission and values, they emerge from. And I sort of think of it as like emergent thinking, because it's not directed. You're not trying to like work through something in a linear fashion. You're just sort of like explicitly not thinking about anything and sort of waiting to see what comes out. And I don't know if that would work for everybody, but that's how I have often arrived at these conclusions about mission or vision.
Okay, because when you said that your mission when you said your mission was to help people make time for what matters, I was thinking, oh, that's such a nice soundbite. Like, how is that something that you kind of developed over time, or was that something that you knew you wanted to do kind of from the outset?
No, that came relatively recently. That came in like the last 5 years.
Okay.
I don't think I was driven by any particular mission earlier in my career. I was just following my curiosity and doing things that I enjoyed and that paid well, and whatever. And I think that I began to think about time in a different way. I began to think about what's beyond productivity. When I was working at Google, and the sort of the trajectory for me up to that point had been that I was a kid. I grew up in a small town, and I was kind of nerdy, so I was always just like getting into projects, doing stuff that I found interesting. And I was in university where you have a lot of time to explore, take different classes, try things. And then I was working at a startup where it was certainly intense, but there was not a ton of structure, because it's not like we had a million meetings. It was just like a small team. There were fewer than 10 people when I joined. And then I was at Google, and it was a huge company, and I had meetings all the time, and I had tons of email and tons of administrative work. And so I had kind of leaned into this productivity optimization to stay on top of all the stuff and get everything done and do inbox zero every day. But in that period was when I realized, oh, like getting all the stuff done is not the same as doing the right stuff. And so I guess that was when my thinking started to shift. And then it really clicked when I was at Google Ventures, because it wasn't just about me anymore. It wasn't just like my direct personal experience and my team. It was like going into all these different companies and saying, wow, you have every advantage in the world. You're brilliant. You've got the right skills. You're highly funded. You're whatever. But still, you don't necessarily. You struggle to spend your time on the things that really matter to your business and to you, and you get sucked into the same traps of distraction and interruption that we all get sucked into. And so that was sort of when it clicked. And then seeing as I started to write about it and share about it, first with Design Sprints and then with some of the writing that became Make Time, that was when I realized that there was something there.
Okay, fantastic. So I think that's a good way to segue into kind of the main topic of this kind of discussion, I guess, which is I really want to talk to you about the book, because firstly, it's just so pretty. Like, everyone, look at that, it's just so nice. It's like one of the most beautifully designed books that I've ever seen. It's sort of like I guess you've seen Principles by Ray Dalio. That's like really pretty. But this is like pretty, but like in a more approachable way, whereas that is pretty, but in a very sort of highbrow kind of way. If that
definitely
makes sense.
Yeah.
And I guess kind of the reason I was so interested in it, I think I first came across it on a podcast called it's called Bookworm, where every 2 weeks they discuss books, and they were kind of raving about Make Time, especially about kind of the daily highlight stuff. And so I first heard about the book through that, and then I think we connected through like my newsletter or Twitter or something. I might have tweeted about it, but I think it's a pretty good kind of instruction manual for that thing of like. Because like one of the questions that I get kind of most frequently from people on the internet is, how do you kind of have the time to do all the stuff that you do? Because like I'm a doctor, and then on the side I have this YouTube channel, and I like to give the impression that I've got this vibrant social life as well. And I've never quite been able to sort of articulate it in a way that makes sense. But I think kind of the 4-part framework that you've got in here is really good. So I wonder if we can just kind of talk about the 4 kind of components of it, and then we'll kind of dive into some of the tactics as we go along. Does that sound all right?
Yeah, that sounds great. Do you want me to just kind of walk through it, or do you want to set it up?
So I've got some notes here, but if you could just kind of give us an overview of kind of what are the 4 broad steps, and then I'll kind of ask you some questions as we go along.
Okay, yeah. So let me give a little bit of context. So my co-author, my good friend Jake Knapp, and we have read tons of productivity books and self-help books and stuff like that, and we often bristled at those books because they were very prescriptive, and they said, do this, follow these 15 things, and you'll be golden. And so when we started to write about this stuff, we wanted it to be not a single recipe, step 1, step 2, step 3, but more like a cookbook. And so we wanted to have a lot of different recipes that you could use depending on what worked for you, what clicked for you. And so that's why, you mentioned the tactics. That's why there's 87 different tactics in the book. It's like, imagine you get a cookbook and there's a bunch of different stuff, and nobody gets a cookbook and they're like, all right, page 1, first recipe, time to make it. Nobody does that. You kind of flip through, you find the things that look good to you. And so that's the way the book is structured. And then we kind of put this sort of very opinionated framework around it. And we said, like, we don't care which tactics you use. We don't care if you use the tactics that are in the book or other stuff. But we think that if you kind of think about those tactics, those specific things that you're doing, those actual, the actions that you're doing in the moment, we think if those follow or kind of fit into this 4-step framework, you're going to be successful. And so the 4 steps are: 1, highlight. And so this is really about being proactive, starting proactively with your day and asking yourself, like, what's the one thing that matters most to me today? The one thing I want to make time for, the one thing I want to bring my best focus, my best energy to. And so it's a bit different than other systems or approaches in that, it's not about doing as much as possible. It's about choosing the one thing. that's really important. Then the next step is laser, and this is all about defense. So if the first step is offense, what do I want to make time for? Laser is defense. So it's how do I manage my attention? How do I avoid getting sucked into all the other stuff that's going on in the world so that I can stay focused on that thing that matters? And this is where our background as tech designers really, I think, comes in handy, because we can share sort of this behind the scenes approach of like, okay, this is why this stuff is distracting. This is why we find our phones so irresistible. This is why even the news, even this sort of this thing that is ostensibly very like above the fray and respectable, even that is engineered using the same techniques that are used to make Twitter addictive or whatever. So our philosophy there is to really kind of understand those mechanisms so that you can cut them off. You can like break those habit loops so that you don't have to like, clench your fists and like use willpower to like resist checking stuff. It's just not there for you. And then the third step is a bit different, and it's about energy. And so it's kind of based on the idea that like, when we're reading about or thinking about, how we're spending our time or what we're focused on, we tend to focus on our brains. It's all about the decisions that we're making and those types of things. But we've all kind of experienced this struggle that if your body's not well, your brain doesn't work. You don't get enough sleep, you drank too much, whatever it might be, like that feeling is there, but our culture does not encourage us to think about our bodies and brains as being one system. So that's why step 3, energize, is there, and it's all about really simple ways that you can take care of yourself so that you have energy for that stuff that you really care about. And then the fourth step might actually be the most important, because it's one that I think is oftentimes missing, and it's reflect. And it's all about kind of looking back every day and taking notes on what worked for you. And so this is where kind of this, do it yourself sort of, adjust and adapt part of the philosophy comes in. This is kind of the mechanism for going through all those 87 recipes and finding the ones that worked, is this idea of this daily reflection. So those are the 4 steps: highlight, laser, energize, and reflect.
Awesome. And there's a good kind of graphic that I want to show people just to give an idea of, like, if I just do a quick flick through this book, you'll see that there's a lot of kind of illustrations, and it's just generally nice. I don't know how this is appearing on camera, but I'm trusting my lens to do the work for me. Here we go. So we've got this sort of. I'm hoping that that's vaguely visible. Highlight, laser, energize, and reflect. I think that's a really good way of putting it. So I've got a few kind of. I wonder if we can kind of dive into some of the specifics about these in turn, because there are some bits that I want to ask your opinion on, and some bits that I think I could share something with the audience on. And I think like when it comes to this sort of stuff, like it really doesn't matter whether you're kind of a CEO at some like famous big company versus a 13-year-old secondary school student from India. Like, we all struggle with this thing of how do we make time for the things that are important, and having some kind of framework to think about it. It's kind of like with any model. Yeah, sure, maybe it's not exactly 100% how the brain actually works, but the point is having that model is still like a useful framework to hang our own thinking off of. Yeah, and I think I think of your, how you manage your time and your attention and your energy. I kind of think of that as one of the pillars of like the stuff you need to master to just be a successful and contented human. You need to know how to deal with your money. Like, you need to know how to take care of yourself, your health. Like, you need to know how to form and like maintain relationships with people. And you need to know how to you need some approach for how you're going to spend your time and what you're going to pay attention to. Because if you don't, there's everybody else is going to decide for you. There's so much information. There's the technology products that we now live with, they're amazing, but they are so well engineered to pull us in these different directions that if you don't have some type of framework, and it doesn't have to be make time, it could be a different framework, but if you don't have a system for it, you're going to find that you're spending your days on whatever random stuff pops into your brain instead of on the stuff that you care about. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well said. So I wonder if we can kind of start with the highlight thing. So you've got I guess to paraphrase, the main point we're saying is that we want to start our days by figuring out what is kind of the one thing that we kind of need to/want to get done that day. And you've got an interesting framework for this. I think it's urgency, satisfaction, and joy. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah. So I wonder if you can talk a bit about how you think about those in terms of like figuring out what your highlight should be. Because kind of for me, earlier this morning, I was thinking, okay, the one thing I want to get done today is I want to film this video that I'm working on about how to make money online. But then I've also got a load of other things to do in my day, one of which was having this chat with you. So like, how do I think about what should my highlight be versus what should kind of the rest of my to-do list be, if that makes sense?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think the short answer is to not overthink it. Like it's meant to be an intuitive process. And I think baked into the philosophy of Make Time is that we should trust our intuition, and that, if we're managing our inputs and if we're giving ourselves enough space to kind of do some of that passive thinking, some of that emergent thinking, then we're going to have a good sense. Most days we're going to like have this kind of gut sense of like that's that thing's kind of burning. Like that's the thing that it's really time sensitive, or I've not been paying attention to it for the last few weeks and I really need to, or with the case of like joy, it might be like, I'm feeling burned out and I just got to like take a day to like chill, and my highlight is going to be like going for a long walk, or something like that, or hanging out with friends, having people over, whatever. So it really is meant to be kind of intuitive. But we sort of provide those three strategies as kind of a shortcut, and particularly for people who are new to thinking of their time in this way, that's kind of just a helpful lens to sort of, as you're considering all the things that you could do, looking through those lenses of like urgency, satisfaction, and joy, that oftentimes like brings a bit of clarity. And once you start to do that, then it kind of clicks into place for you. There's another like kind of sort of layer on this that we didn't really write about in the book, but I think is important, which is that it doesn't always have to be the thing that you want to quote unquote make time for. Like it's not always a new thing that's getting added to your day. Like sometimes it's really, really valuable to just identify that thing that needs your best attention or needs your best energy. So it might be like your whole day might already be booked out. You might already have, there's no room. You're not going to add anything else. But by sort of using the highlight as this focusing tool, you can not only make sure that you're bringing your best to that one thing, but you can also use it as a way of sort of designing what you want your experience of that day to be. And this is something we did write about in a little bit of the book, is this idea that that our experience of life is really based on what we pay attention to. And this idea goes back, to, even Stoicism, has some kind of stuff about this, like this idea that you can choose where to direct your attention. And if you think of, if there's a problem, if you think of that as an opportunity, you actually change the way that you experience that. And so, for example, if I'm, going to be giving a talk somewhere, I don't need to make time for that. Like that's going to happen, but I can choose to really focus on that. I can say that's going to be my highlight. It's not a new thing, but I know that if I bring my best energy and my attention to that, and if I kind of structure my day around that one thing, not only am I going to do a better job, but I'm going to feel better about my day because I'm going to have kind of this clarity and this sense of purpose about like what's the most important thing. So it doesn't always have to be this new thing. Sometimes it can just be a focusing tool on top of whatever else you're already committed to.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. There was something in the book that intrigued me, and that was the idea of setting goals. And I think you had a little bit here about kind of whether or not it's really valuable to have these kind of 3-year, 5-year, 10-year goals. And I've always felt a little bit kind of uneasy about goals personally, because
Yeah.
if like kind of what James Clear says about goals, that goals have a few problems in that they're very temporary and they're sort of deferring happiness. Like you're waiting for yourself to kind of achieve that goal
Yeah.
before like implicitly you can kind of be happy. But then
Yep.
again, on the other side of the coin, you've got people usually kind of in the business sphere who say that it's really important to have goals that you can kind of have the whole team behind, and it's important to have this like 5-year goal so you know where you're kind of heading. And I wonder how you think about goals in that regard.
It sounds like you and I have a similar philosophy on goals, which is that I'm not a huge fan of goals. And when I say goals, what I mean is really kind of destination-based goals. So by the end of the year, I want to have achieved this milestone, or
Yeah.
I want to hit this number or whatever. I think directional goals are really valuable. If I say I want to improve in this way, I want to get better at doing this thing, I want to grow this number from my business or whatever it might be, that's really helpful, because I think then you can translate that into the process or the actions that you're going to need every day. Because the best way to achieve your goal is really to kind of build a habit or build a process around the day in and day out stuff that needs to happen to get there. But if you haven't attached your sort of satisfaction or your happiness to a specific point, a specific milestone, then you also kind of avoid the disappointment or the feelings of dissatisfaction that might come whether you reach it or not. And that's kind of I think that's sort of the darkest thing about goals, is that, and I mean the more traditional kind of destination-based goals, is like you can't win. Like if you don't get there, you're dissatisfied because you didn't get there. And if you do get there, then you're sort of like, oh, now what? Like how do I maintain motivation to keep going? And so I sort of think of them as directions, not destinations. And then I also think of them as, I think of them as like a stepping stone to designing my days. So the goal is really, I want to give it a fleeting thought. I want to say like, okay, yeah, I want to get there. Cool, great. Now I'm going to forget about that, and I'm going to instead translate it into like, all right, what do I do today? What do I do tomorrow? What do I do next week? What are the processes I want to put into place? What are the habits I want to build? What are the things that I want to get good at so that I can be moving in that direction? But I think when we focus too much on goals, we put ourselves into a game that we can't win.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. So there's an analogy that I often think about when it comes to goals, which is that, let's say my goal is to run a marathon. Fine, like
Yeah.
I'll think about that very briefly because it sets the direction, but then I will laser focus on, right, what does that mean each day in terms of what I actually need to get done. And
Yeah.
I was talking about something similar with Noah Kagan, who runs the Sumo group of apps. Used to work at Facebook and Mint and stuff, and he sort of splits goals into three categories. They can be numerical goals, or progress goals, or system goals. So it sounds like we're all agreed that numerical goals, like for me, hitting 1 million subscribers by 2021. I mean, it's just such a pointless goal, because like, why on earth would you have that kind of destination? Whereas a systems goal for me would be more like producing 2 or 3 videos a week, or a progress goal would be just kind of hoping that the quality of videos improves over time, as evidenced by just kind of subjectively. So I think maybe that's another way of reframing goals in a way that's potentially more useful, rather than this kind of number that I need to hit, otherwise I'll be unsatisfied if I hit it.
Yeah. And the other thing that I often think about with goals is that when I reflect on my own life so far, there are some things that I have done that I have, I've been really happy I did, that I feel very proud of and contented with, that did come from a goal. But there's a lot of things that didn't. There's a lot of stuff that have basically been opportunities that have come around. And if I had been, and in fact, at the time, I struggled sometimes with those decisions. For example, the decision to join Google Ventures, like it was not in line with like what my goals were at the time. And so I almost said no to that opportunity, which in hindsight is crazy. But I was much more focused on this specific destination that I wanted to reach by a certain time, and that didn't fit the plan. So I think goals can be, they can help us move toward things that need to be accomplished in a certain way at a certain time. And a good example of that is, like I mentioned briefly, that my wife and I, when we left San Francisco, we did some extended travel. We lived on our sailboat and we sailed through Central America, living on our boat. And that was something that kind of required a very goal-oriented approach, because there was a certain time of year based on the weather that we needed to leave, and there was a certain checklist of things that needed to be done for our safety in order to be able to leave. But there's a whole lot of things that they don't fit into that structure. And if you're too goal focused, then you might miss some really cool opportunities or some really great things that otherwise could lead to outcomes that are way better than whatever your goals were. So
yeah,
that's another thing that I think about, especially when I mentioned that I'm sort of always kind of considering and thinking about different opportunities, and I'm always trying to keep that in mind. I'm always trying to think, all right, like, where does this fit relative to a goal that I have for myself? And if not, like, what does that mean? Is that like a bad thing? Does that mean I shouldn't do it? Or does that mean that maybe it's one of these things that comes around every few years that could end up being way better than what I had planned for myself?
Yeah, because I guess what we're saying is that with any of these like mental models for how to think about stuff, it is helpful to know the limits of the model as well. Like, if you have a purely goal-based approach or a purely anti-goals approach, like 100% in either direction is probably not really helpful. But to be able to appreciate the model and be like, okay, in this context, I've got this life-changing opportunity. It doesn't technically align with one of my goals, but oh well, I'm going to go for it anyway.
Yeah, right. And that's why they're models. They are approximations of reality. And in this case, the reality of whatever's going on in our brains is extremely complex and difficult to understand. Yeah. So we need models, and we can't just have one model because our brains are complex and because we don't fully understand them. So we need lots of different models, and we need to remember not to be too rigidly attached to any one, because again, it's a model, it's an approximation.
Absolutely. So in the book, like as you said, so we've got these 4 areas: highlight, laser, energize, and reflect. And sort of across those, we've got 87 different tactics. And I guess sort of the point of the book is that it's sort of a recipe book where you sort of pick and choose the things that work for you. There were a few things within the highlight section that really stuck out to me. So I really liked this thing of having a might-do list. I wonder if you can just kind of elaborate on that a little bit, because that was like, oh, damn, this is some good stuff.
Sure, yeah. So the might-do list is kind of the anti-to-do list. So I think it's almost productivity gospel that you've got to have a to-do list, and it's got to be organized, and it's got to be, the items have to be estimated and ranked and prioritized, and that's your source of truth. And I used to be like way into that. I tried tons of different to-do list systems. I even designed my own to-do list apps 2 different times, and I eventually I burned out, and I found that really having like a traditional to-do list did not serve me. But I still needed like a list. I still needed a place to keep track of stuff that I might do, stuff that I should do, could do, whatever. And so I eventually came up with this idea of a might-do list, and it was inspired by a little bit by like the someday maybe list from Getting Things Done, and a little bit by like a product backlog and like agile software development. I worked on a few teams that followed agile methodologies, and so it's a list without any commitments to whether you're going to do something. So it's not a to-do list; it's a might-do list, and I think it's a key part of making it work is that it's like, it needs to be like plain text, or it needs to be like something very unprecious. Like it can't be, there can't be any like ranking or prioritizing. Like, and the other important thing about it is that you don't work off the list. So the list it's this like bank that you can pull from when you're figuring out what you're going to actually do today or this week or this month. But then the calendar becomes sort of the source of truth in terms of what am I actually doing. And so that's kind of how I manage my time and sort of my projects. And that's what I've been doing for the last, I don't know, probably 5 or so years, is I have this might-do list that has a bunch of stuff on it. Somebody just asked about this actually in the Make Time community that we run as part of our course. Somebody asked, somebody was kind of struggling with how many things should be on it, like what should it be structured and so I went and looked back on my list and did some kind of analyzed it a little bit, and I found that I had right now I have like 90 things on my might do list, and they're in I think 5 different categories, and so those are just like, it's literally plain text, so it's in a note on my phone, and it's just like a heading and then like a bunch of stuff, a heading and a bunch of stuff, a heading and a bunch of stuff. And I don't even look at it every day. It's like something that I look at every once in a while, but then I'm constantly translating things from the might do list, and also from, it's just stuff that comes into my inbox or things that I think of. I'm translating from there onto the calendar. And then the calendar is really like, that's the plan for the day, because it forces you to confront these trade-offs in terms of your time, this finite resource that we have. And so I think it's a better way to work for me, and for a lot of people. It's a better way to work than working off a to-do list, because to-do lists tend to reward small kind of quick wins. And they also, I think, make it a lot harder for us to be realistic about how much we can do, which then sets us up for disappointment because we don't finish everything on the to-do list.
Yeah, so this idea really resonated when I read the book. Like, I've also kind of dabbled with like every different to-do list app under the sun, except OmniFocus.
Yeah.
I haven't tried that yet. That's kind of next on the list at some point. But I'm trying to personally avoid this trap of kind of thinking that, that guy uses that app and he's successful, therefore if I use that app then I'll be successful. But I quite like having this kind of list of stuff that you can do, but you don't have to get to it on a particular day. I think like with my life in particular, there are so few actual deadlines that I have for things. If it's stuff like this where we've arranged a thing, it'll go in the calendar. But I feel like the traditional to-do list format is a very kind of getting things done where you have a deadline, I guess because they're built for kind of the world of corporate work where there's a defined deadline. Whereas for me, it's stuff like, I want to busk on the London Underground at some point. I want to have my own magic show. I want to kind of start a sort of video live stream podcast kind of like this one. All of these things are kind of on the might-do list. And then at some point, like I try and look at mine every day, because at the moment there's not many things on it. But I just kind of quickly glance through the list and think, oh, okay, part of my list is to busk on the London Underground. Therefore, why don't I spend half an hour practicing like guitar chords right now? And I find it's good for giving me a direction when otherwise I would just kind of go on the sofa and scroll through Instagram.
Totally, yeah, and it's similar to goals in that way, in that it's this thing that it's sort of this touch point. It's this stepping stone. It's like you glance briefly at it just to sort of remind yourself of what you previously said you cared about, but then the real work is in the translation of that into, okay, what am I actually going to do today that might help me get there?
Yeah.
And I think that's the key. That's the key step that many people do not take, and that has been totally life-changing for me.
Fantastic. Just quickly for the people watching, so if you've got questions and stuff that are directly relevant to kind of the stuff we're talking about, that aren't questions like, Ali, do you like Abdaal, or which political team do you support, or things like that, then if you can put them in the chat, Angus is monitoring the chat and he'll put them on the Notion page that we've got set up over here. So we'll add kind of the relevant questions there, and hopefully we'll kind of answer them as we go along. But it's really hard to keep up with the chat, especially with all the spam that's going on. The spam is fine. It's good that you all are talking to each other, but that's kind of how we're going to be dealing with Q&A. Oh, and
a few people mentioned cat in the background. Is it one of my cats, or is it your cat? Do you have a cat?
I don't have a cat. I have no idea what they're talking about, unless a stray has walked in.
I have 2 cats, and I think I didn't realize that one of them is visible just over my shoulder right here, and she's sleeping, and I didn't realize that she was visible. So.
I'm sure people are enjoying that one. One of the questions we've got is, what are the differences between Make Time and Getting Things Done? And they are kind of markedly different books, but I wonder if you can kind of articulate the differences.
Sure. There are a few big differences. I think that, and I used to be way into GTD. Like, I read that book many times. I went through a period of my life when I had everything set up exactly the way you're supposed to do it in the book, even including like the 43 folders, based on dates and all that stuff. I think of GTD really as a productivity system, and there's probably going to be some GTD fans who razz me for this, but I think of it as it's a productivity system, and it's a sort of like your whole life goes in here system, in the sense that it is meant to be all encompassing. And David says that like in the first few pages of the book, that like there should be no like loose thoughts rattling around in your brain. Like they should all go into the system. Make time really is sort of a level up from there. It's a focusing system. So it can sit on top of GTD. It can sit on top of other approaches or frameworks. It doesn't require them. So like I don't use anything really from GTD anymore. And I kind of just use Make Time on its own, but it's really a focusing system in the sense that it helps you kind of, pan the spotlight and sort of like figure out, okay, like that's the thing that really matters to me. And then it gives you this set of tools for like, how am I going to like clear everything else away so that I can focus on that? And I think particularly with the emphasis on avoiding distraction through kind of creating environmental changes or creating structural barriers, and then also building energy. Those are things that really set it apart from GTD. So I think if you like GTD and you use it and you feel like it's not quite enough, then Make Time can sit on top, but it doesn't, Make Time is not meant to be a like, put your whole life in here. It's not like an organizational system, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Like the way I kind of think of it is Make Time is, I guess, kind of one level abstracted from GTD, whereas getting things done is all about kind of, these are the specifics. This is a defined system that you should follow. Whereas Make Time is more a series of principles and tactics that kind of sits on top of that. And sure, you can combine one with the other, you can kind of do your own system, but that's kind of the point. You kind of mix and match from different places, figure out what works for you. But ultimately, I guess we have to remember to not get tied up into this trap of trying to find the perfect productivity system while not actually doing any of the work that we need to get done in the first place. What's a personal sprint? That was an intriguing thing.
Yeah, well, this kind of ties back to the design sprint process. So when I was working at Google Ventures in this role where we would go inside a different startup kind of like every week and work with them, I quickly realized that there was no way that I could have the answers for all of those teams' questions, that instead I needed to have a process, kind of a systematic approach for helping them find their own answers. And around that time, I met Jake Knapp, who's now one of my best friends, and we've written 2 books together. But he had begun experimenting with this new process for team collaboration that he called a design sprint. And this was a thing that he came up with. It was really a way to bring a team together to kind of get a new thing off the ground. So whether it's a new product, a new feature, a new marketing campaign, a new service, whatever, kind of go from like, we should do this, that would be cool, kind of go from there to like, all right, what does it really look like? What does it really mean to make that happen? And so we ended up kind of fleshing out this process and running about 150 design sprints with companies that Google had invested in, including like Slack and Uber and Blue Bottle Coffee and a ton of companies. And so anyway, the personal sprint, which is in the book, is this idea that that sometimes kind of working on the same thing every day, like day after day, can have like leveraged benefits, right? So let's say you spend like 2 hours a day for 5 days working on something. Like, okay, in theory, that's 10 hours of work. But I think that it's actually the equivalent of maybe 12 hours or 15 hours, because when you work on the same thing day after day, you kind of build up some momentum, or you get some, I sometimes think about it as like your short-term memory, your RAM, like you kind of load all the data you need from the hard drive into that part of your brain that you have quick access to, and then you don't have to take as long kind of booting up or spinning up the next day when you work on it. So it's for it's for any kind of like big project, and I use this a lot when I'm for example, creating a new presentation, or like I just started a project right now to redesign the Design Sprint website. And so for when I'm doing a project like that, it's, I don't just try to like steal time here and there between other things to work on it. I try to make it like kind of the theme for a week and say, all right, my highlight every single day for this week is going to be to work on that project. And I just find that it, the whole is far greater than the sum of the parts when I put together a personal sprint to focus on something.
Nice. And yeah, so that's sort of something that me and my team have been doing. Like, normally when it comes to our videos, it's a very sort of spread out process of getting them out. Kind of we've got loads of videos in the pipeline, and then we're kind of working on some at a time. But occasionally, if we've got like an online course coming out about how to study for exams, we'd kind of really laser focus on that thing for like a solid week, where I kind of just write everything on the Monday and then refine everything on the Tuesday, film everything on the Wednesday. Otherwise, these kind of bigger projects end up really taking absolutely ages. Whereas we're like, right, we're going to get this done by the weekend. It's a sort of focusing way of getting the thing done. And I think this applies to even if you're in school when it comes to writing a big project, kind of like Parkinson's law, work expands to fill the time that we allocate to it. If you kind of, if you're like, all right, I'm going to learn everything in the subject in the next week, that really forces you to actually think about the stuff that's important rather than just sort of wasting time doing any old thing.
Yeah. And I think it's not just time. Like, it's not just about getting it done more quickly. I think that the quality is actually higher. Like, it's sort of that craftsman approach to building something where, like, when you're really steeped in your work and where, again, you sort of benefit from having, keeping things loaded into that short-term memory and not having to set something aside and get up to speed on something else and then switch back. Like, I think you're obviously faster. You get you get it done more quickly, but I think you're better too. Like, I think the quality is actually better when you build that time for deep work, that time to focus, not just like an hour at a time, but really like a day or a week or a month at a time. With all the other stuff you have to do, but kind of like being very clear that like that's in the background and in the foreground is this thing that I'm really structuring my life around for this period of time.
Cool. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The final point that I kind of highlighted from the highlight section was this thing that you said that you became a morning person, and I've kind of wanted to become a morning person for years. Like, how do you go about becoming a morning person? And I'm sure a load of people kind of watching this are thinking, I'd love to be one of those people that wakes up at 5 a.m. and does my yoga, Pilates, meditation, cold shower, blah blah blah. What does your thing look like, and how do you suggest that we kind of go about it for people who are wastemen like me?
Yeah, well, yeah. So I like, throughout, I guess, high school in the U.S., secondary school, and then like university, I was a night owl in my 20s. I was always up late at night doing design work or writing or coding or whatever. And it was in sort of the first couple of years we lived in San Francisco when two things happened. One was my wife was working in a job where their culture there was very early. Like, they had a lot of early meetings. They worked with a lot of people in Europe, so they often had meetings that were early in the US to accommodate Europe working hours. So that was one thing. And the other thing that happened was that I was starting to have more and more of a drive to take on bigger projects outside of work. So wanting to be able to carve out time. And I thought, if I could kind of get up early when my wife was already getting up early, and if I could maybe use some of those, free hours, those quote unquote free hours before the workday begins to do something else, that might really work well for me. That might enable me to make time for these things that I wanted to be doing. And so the way that I approached it was to be to think both about the focal point of why I was doing it, but also then think about kind of the background or the support for what I needed to do and able to support it. And my morning routine is nothing like the ones that you read about where it's the yoga and the cold shower and all that stuff. For me, it is all about the reason I'm waking up early. So it starts with my highlight. It starts with the thing that I want to do. And so, and for me, that is super motivating. And I've been doing this since like 2012. Just like, I think it would be very difficult for me to wake up early to do like a morning routine, to go through like a bunch of stuff that I know is good for me in theory. But if I have like a thing that I want to get done, then I'm like, oh, I want to wake up early so that I can do that. And I know that like I'm going to have my best energy first thing when I wake up. I like literally I leave my phone, I'm pointing over there because there's a cabinet over there where we put our devices at night, they charge, and I leave my phone in there when I wake up and I come to the computer. I don't have my email open. I don't have anything open on the computer. I just like get into whatever it is I want to do. And that motivation is really powerful for me. But of course, that's not the whole story. You have to like do other things to enable yourself to get up early. And so I had to kind of tinker with and experiment with my nighttime routine as well, because these things they're related. You can't have one without the other. And for me, really the biggest thing, and it's super simple, but it's just going to bed earlier. And then that kind of flowed into another set of things I need to figure out. And some of the biggest ones there were like caffeine. And we wrote about caffeine quite a bit in the book. I learned both from experience and from reading research that caffeine stays in our systems, in our bodies, way longer than most people think, much longer than I thought it did. And so, like, if you're drinking any caffeine at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, like, there's gonna be a lot of caffeine still in your body if you try to go to bed at 10. And it's gonna be hard to go to bed. So I started like basically kind of moving back my last call for caffeine. So I generally don't drink anything caffeinated after about 1 p.m. or 1:30 p.m. And then the other thing that helped me kind of go to sleep early so that I could wake up early was thinking about light and about information. So, there's been research that I think is, there's evidence kind of in both directions, but I think there's something to the idea that staring at a screen immediately before you go to sleep is probably disruptive to your sleep.
It's not very good.
Yeah. And then depending on what you're looking at on that screen, it can be extra disruptive because it's not just physiological, but then it can be mental or emotional as well. If you're reading the news for an hour before you go to bed, or you're scrolling through Twitter or whatever, like, there's going to be some things that get you riled up that, cause some anxiety, that make you feel stressed or whatever. And so, I got pretty hardcore about like not looking at any devices after about 9 o'clock at night. The only exception is television. Watching something on TV, assuming it's not like the news, like it's pretty okay. It's not the same as scrolling through a feed. And so that was the other thing that really helped me like get to bed earlier. And so little by little over time, it just sort of like, as I focused on those two counterbalancing forces, it just sort of like shifted. And so it's been, now it's like, it's sort of like with the highlight thing, eventually it becomes intuitive and you don't have to like really think sort of rigorously about it. Like now it's just normal for me. Like I don't wake up as early as I used to because I don't have like an office job anymore. But I wake up at like 6:30 and I go to bed at about 10:30, and it's just kind of like what I do. And those first few hours of the day are like so important to me, not because I follow like some crazy routine, but because that's my time to bring my best focus and bring my best energy to that thing that I want to do that day.
Yeah, I think that point is really important. Like that thing you were saying about kind of having a reason to get up early. Like for me, especially in this kind of lockdown time, I feel like I've been sleeping a lot later than I normally would. Not because I kind of have to. I mean, I'm still getting my 7 hours, but like earlier today, I find it a real struggle to get up in the morning, and it was just because now I feel like on the weekends, I've literally just got the entire day to myself, and I only really had this one video I needed to film. I was kind of like, I can have a lie-in until midday. I can still get this video done. Whereas on other days when it's like, okay, I've got work this afternoon, I've got a night shift the rest of the week, I need to get these videos out. Then I kind of wake up in the morning with a spring in my step because I'm like, yes, I need to do something worthwhile. And so what I've started doing now is kind of arranging phone calls with friends at either 9 or 10 in the morning, just to force myself awake and like kind of showered and moisturized and stuff, so I can actually start the day. And I always feel much better having gotten up slightly earlier, rather than be like, oh well, sleep is important, let me get an extra 2 hours of it. Because I think we do get diminishing returns when it comes to kind of time that we sleep. Yeah.
And I do like the weekends, even though the days are kind of all the same now, like I still do sleep a little bit later on the weekends, unless there's some real specific reason to get up early. And I don't know if it's, maybe if I woke up at exactly the same time every day, that would be better for me in some way. But I really like sort of rhythms of things. I like whether it's kind of the rhythm of a day or a week or a season. I sort of like when there's a bit of a kind of predictable and gentle change in what I'm doing. And so for me, like, whether there's actual like benefits from sleeping longer, I don't know. But like the fact that I sleep like a little bit later on the weekends and just like, it just sort of changes the feeling of those days. And it's sort of a bit of a reminder that like, okay, yeah, this is a weekend. Like another week has passed. Like maybe I'm going to be a bit more reflective. Maybe I'm going to be like, sort of lower my expectations for myself in terms of what I'm going to do or get done. And I don't know, that's kind of a squishy thing, but it's something that I like to do that kind of helps me mark the passage of time.
Nice. Okay, cool. So I think we'll sort of draw a line under the highlight section for now. I wonder if we could just like answer some questions from the crowd as in this kind of interim place. So we've got one here. What's your advice for people who struggle to start? I guess that's always the hardest part of doing anything, like actually starting it. I wonder if you've got any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I've kind of like two ways that I approach that, and I don't know which strategy I use when, so I'll just tell you both. One is and this is very typical advice, but one is to basically break down the big thing into small things. And this comes from GTD, I think, the idea that like instead of like redesigning a website, it's like sketch the homepage layout. It's sort of like, how do I translate this very big, intimidating thing into like a very small thing that I can do? I could probably finish that today, and I can kind of get some momentum going. The other strategy that I have is, and I don't remember where I got this from, but I've sort of been stuck in my brain for years. My other strategy is to start in the middle. And so the idea here is that like there's a big thing, and there's probably some optimal way to go through it. There's probably sort of the industrial model for like, do this, then do that, then do that, and then it's gonna be done. Like, I like the sort of freedom and self-permission to start in the middle and not try to be like optimized about it, but just say, like, what's the part of this that is just like pulling at me or just like feels fun or feels like a good place to jump in. And so again, to use the example of like a website redesign, it might just be like, might be like browsing through like templates, if it's going to be like a WordPress redesign, like just browsing through themes, or like, might be like, if the website's going to have some content, some contributed stories from other people, it might be reaching out to those people, like that's probably not the first thing you need to do, but like, if it's a thing that is going to be necessary anyway, and is going to help you start, then it's fine. Like start there, start in the middle. So that's a strategy that I use.
Nice. Yeah, that sounds fairly similar to what I do as well. I've never really heard the phrase "start in the middle," but I'm now going to adopt that. It's like, oh yeah, just start in the middle. Because like at the moment I'm working on a redesign for my own website, but yeah. I've been thinking like the optimal structure of this is that I actually start by figuring out what the goal of the website is, and then start by figuring out what the structure of the pages is going to be. But sometimes it's nice to just go and dribble and kind of browse some inspiration and be like, oh, that's a really nice color. Oh, I love the fonts they've used there. And sometimes that is a more interesting way of getting into the thing rather than let me do the really hard work of figuring out kind of the high level structure stuff.
Especially if, in the case of this person who asked this question, especially if what you're struggling with is getting started. Like if you're struggling to get started, then the most important thing is doing something to get you started. And so it doesn't really matter if you do that in a suboptimal way.
Yeah, and like specifically for like school and university and things, I often would find that if I'm writing an essay and I'm trying to start with the introduction, it's never going to get done. But if I'm writing an essay and I start from paragraph number 2, it'll get done, and then I can figure out the introduction at the end. And that also has the happy side effect is that, the introduction is the most important part, and you should kind of write the introduction once you've figured out what the essay is actually about, so that you can write the perfect introduction rather than thinking, oh shit, I need to write this introduction.
Yeah, that actually reminds me of a couple other things that I do. One is when I'm writing an email, I write the subject line last.
Oh, nice.
I don't know. Visual, but it's not the way the UI is structured. And another thing is when I'm writing something, like I kind of think of like the writing as being something that happens away from the computer, and then the computer is just like typing it, because I tend to do a lot of like thinking kind of like when I'm walking or I'm doing chores or whatever, like I'm thinking about what I'm going to write. Maybe I'm pulling out my phone and jotting down little notes. So by the time I actually get to the computer to like, okay, now I'm capital W writing, I already have like a really, really strong sense of what I'm going to write. And so I guess it's kind of the same philosophy of like, don't make this sort of big, formal, elaborate sort of like introduction. What's the very first important thing I want to say, but just like diving in where you can dive in and then kind of build everything out from there.
Yeah. So we've got another question. Like, how do you manage tasks that don't have a deadline? And I guess it's hard to know without kind of a specific example. But I guess for me, like most of my tasks don't really have a deadline of any sort. And so I tend to just kind of go with what I feel like doing in the moment. And it just like, for me, I'm very lucky in that most of the stuff I feel like doing is pretty productive. In fact, we can talk more about this thing about watching the news and watching TV, because I think we both have some interesting thoughts on that. But like most of what I do is just kind of productive and fun in general. And so some days if I'm feeling that, I kind of feel like doing a bit of music theory today, I'll just do that. Or if I'm feeling, I kind of feel like making a start on the next video, then I'll just kind of do that. And I think it's about, like, for me at least, developing this sort of mindset where the things that I enjoy doing are the things that also move me towards whatever kind of goal we want to go with.
Yeah. I think, there's certainly some tasks or activities that I treat in a similar way. But I also often create deadlines for myself. Deadline's almost not even the right word because that sounds so strict. But I, as I mentioned, I'm really a big fan of scheduling things, of putting things in a calendar. And so when I'm agreeing to do something or when I'm deciding to do something, I'll start to actually schedule it in. So I'll just sort of like make up like, okay, when's a week that I can do this? For example, I've been recording the first season of a Make Time podcast, and it's like a semi-scripted show. So it has a couple of interviews, but it's also like largely it's sort of me like talking through the history and the framework and some of the tactics. And for that is just sort of like, okay, like what's a week that is like mostly open and like it might be 2 months in advance, but like I'm going to flip through my calendar and I'm just going to like draw that in on the calendar, and like I've essentially created, a deadline for myself, even though there is no real deadline. But that sort of commitment, that sort of self, you committing to yourself that you're going to do something at a certain time, works well for me. You can also, like, depending on what the nature of the task is in response to this question, like you can also ask somebody else to create a deadline for you. Like if it's something that somebody has asked you for or requested it, but they're like, no timeline or no deadline or whatever, you can ask them, well, when would you like to get this? Or when would you like to do this? What would be ideal? And sort of like push them to create a deadline for you, because deadlines are very motivating, especially when they're used in conjunction with a calendar or a plan for how you're going to spend your time.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next question we have actually ties us very nicely onto the second section, which is, what are the best ways of staying focused on tasks? And that's like basically like a whole chunk on this book called Laser, which is how do you actually stay focused on the things that matter. I wonder if you could talk to us about infinity pools.
Yeah. So infinity pools are the apps and services, websites, whatever, anything in our life that has sort of an infinite supply of content that is always refreshing. So there's always more water in the pool. You can jump back in at any time. So think of, any app that you can pull to refresh, anything that is streaming. Netflix is kind of a classic in the sense that like you don't even have to decide to start doing something else because it'll automatically start playing the next episode for you. So these are the infinity pools, and I think that everybody to some extent struggles with infinity pools. All of us, we have some, we actually call it Kryptonite, distraction Kryptonite in the book. We have this thing that just as Kryptonite renders Superman powerless, this, whatever app it is or whatever service it is, it sort of makes us powerless to resist. We just kind of get sucked into it. And so our kind of philosophy with that stuff is that because those become habitual actions, they're not things where you're actively deciding to go and spend time on that service or that app, but you're doing it out of habit, that you can't rely on willpower to counteract that force. And there's actually a ton of research on this, so this is not an original observation, but habits, when it's habits versus willpower, like the habits are going to win. And that's why they're so powerful. But that is also why they can be so challenging, so frustrating if we have formed a habit around something that we don't want to be doing, spending time on something that we don't care about, looking at something that isn't serving our interests. So the advice in the book is really to break that habit loop by kind of restructuring the technology, like restructuring your phone by uninstalling apps or by logging out of Twitter, for example. I have a really hard time with Twitter, so I have my password is like a random string I keep in my password manager app, and when I'm not using Twitter on my computer, I log out, and then every time if I have the sort of sensation to be go check Twitter, I'm hit with the login screen, and it's okay, do I want to go through all those steps to sign back in? So it creates friction, slows me down, it makes that sort of habit loop less likely to complete. So whether it's tech stuff like that, or whether it's even just your physical environment, like I mentioned, charging our phones in a cabinet, or making sure that if you don't want to watch TV as much, try to move your TV to a less convenient part of your home, move it to a different room, or move it to a different corner, or someplace where it's not really in the sort of it's not the focal point of the room. So that's kind of the whole thing with laser and with the infinity pools is if there's one of these things that you find yourself being drawn back into again and again and again, don't try to fight it. Don't try to white knuckle it. Instead, find a way to create a barrier to cut yourself off from that thing, because then you'll be free to focus on other stuff. You won't have to use any of your willpower, any of your energy to fight back against that thing.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of thinking about it. There was an example in the book that I particularly enjoyed, which is, I think it's about Jake, but it might have been about you. Which is when you post a tweet, it's not just that 5 seconds about posting a tweet. It's actually the hour that you're spending refreshing Twitter, be oh, I've got 36 likes on it. Oh, someone's retweeted it. Check out their profile. It's all of this baggage associated with just posting a tweet, which just makes it was such a time sink. It's insane.
We call those time craters. Because you think about a crater, the asteroid or whatever, the meteorite that hits Earth or the planet is small, but the crater is huge. And the same thing with something like posting a tweet. The sort of the conscious mental space that it occupies is very small, but the reality is that it has a huge impact on your time and on your attention. And I struggle with that with LinkedIn. I use LinkedIn quite a bit for promoting my work and stuff, and I think it's really good for that. I have no compulsion to check LinkedIn. The content there does not pull me back in for whatever reason. But if I post something, then I'm sucked back in. So it's not the habit loop of oh, did anybody post anything cool? It's all about did anybody like what I posted? Did anybody comment? And I'm sure you can relate to that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's every time I release a video, I know the next 3 hours of my life are going to be spent refreshing the comments and trying to reply to people. And I think it's fine. But if I've got other things to be doing, then I need to be no, I'm not going to look at the stats on that video because it doesn't actually matter. It's in the world now. There's nothing I can do about it. And I have to kind of talk myself down from just sitting on the YouTube analytics app and replying to comments all day.
Right. Well, and I take the same approach to that stuff that I take to any other kind of any of these other infinity pools or distractions, which is I try to compartmentalize it. So I try to have barriers around it, and then I have a specific time of the day when I'm allowed to do it. So I do that with email. I have a couple in the morning. I check email a couple times just to see if there's anything time sensitive, but I have a big block of email time in the afternoon so that I can deal with it, so I can kind of batch process it. And I do the same thing with Twitter and with LinkedIn. I have a few times a day when I check those sites, and I only do it on my computer. I don't have the apps on my phone. Okay. So it's limited by my physical location, it's limited by a certain time of day. And it's not only does it free up all the rest of the time, but it's actually more exciting. Like it's more fun to log back into Twitter and see that like 20 plus on the notification.
That's so nice. It's like, oh yes, I wonder what's going to be.
Than it is to have it like sitting open all the time.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's like, it's reinforcing a better habit. It's still a sort of compulsive habit.
Yeah.
So maybe that's not great, but at least it's more aligned with how I want to be spending my time than just constantly checking.
Yeah, no, it's exactly the same for me on Instagram. Like I'll post a photo, and before I would kind of refresh constantly to be like, oh, one more like. But now I just kind of leave it a few hours, and then it's just really nice coming back to it 6 hours later and being like, oh yes, we're on 6,000 likes. That photo really banged, didn't it? So
yeah,
it's like a way of sort of reinforcing that type of addiction rather than the consistent refreshing addiction.
Yeah.
So there was an interesting bit where you talked about sort of being more like laser focused by limiting the amount of time that we watch TV, and I was very intrigued by that because for me, since my second year of university, when I started my business and started having kind of my time doing other things, I kind of made a rule for myself that I'm not allowed to watch TV unless it's with other people, because watching TV with other people is a good social activity. Watching TV by myself is I'm being a complete waste man. And I've actually reasonably well managed to hold on to this kind of rule, except last week I discovered this Netflix show, Money Heist. I don't know if you've seen it. It's
no, I've heard of it though.
It's incredible. It's like a Spanish sort of heist drama thing. And I was filming like a day in the life vlog, and normally when I do a day in the life vlog, I kind of have the camera and kind of time lapse everything I'm doing and voice over it. And people often comment in the things like, oh, it's so inspiring to see how productive you are. But literally that day I spent 8 hours just like binging the show on Netflix. And I even ordered like a takeaway burger, and I felt like a total slob. But I feel like it's nice to have that kind of bender once in a while, but I still generally hold to the rule that I'm not allowed to watch TV unless it's with other people. In fact, we don't even have a TV in the house, and I've been actively avoiding buying one just so that A, the room doesn't get reorganized around the TV, and B, it's just more friction to have to find a surface to put my iPad on, go on Netflix, decide what to watch. So all of these different barriers that are in place. I wonder if you've got a similar system on the TV front. Yeah,
totally. And well, first of all, I want to say that I love the bender. I'm a big fan of benders, of binge days, of cheat days, whatever you want to call them. And like the sort of the dieting world figured this out. And in many ways, like there's a lot we can learn about like behavior change and about habits from the world of like dieting. In fact, when I was doing some research on willpower, I came across this story from the 90s in the New York Times that was like interviewing all of these psychologists about how willpower is this myth when it comes to like dieting. And I feel like in other circles, like when we're talking about time or productivity or whatever, like we have been a little bit later to come to that realization there's been this narrative that like, oh, you can just like, if you've got the grit and you've got the discipline, you can just like make it happen. And now we're starting to realize like, oh, like that's not quite how it works. Like we need to acknowledge that willpower is not this like magical life-giving source of energy, but really it's this thing that like is a function of our environment. And so like the world of dieting, they have like this notion of like cheat days. And that's because it works. Like, I don't know why it works. I'm sure somebody does, but like this idea of like allowing yourself to just do whatever you want every once in a while is like a pressure release valve that then makes it easier to kind of jump back into the system that you set up for yourself. Anyway, to answer your question, the home that we live in now, the apartment that we live in, is the largest that we've ever lived in. And it's 2 bedrooms. So it's not huge, but it's we've always lived in 1-bedroom apartments before, and we lived on our sailboat for a while, which was very small. But so we have an extra room. So we have our bedroom, and then we have 1 extra room, and we have our television in the extra room. And so it's dark back there. It's like it's got a really comfy couch. It's like the TV's back there, and so we're not really there for most of the day. Like that's not a normal, like it's in the back corner. Like we don't go back there for the most part. except when we watch TV. And so it becomes this very like intentional decision. And we do watch TV almost every night. So it's not like we don't watch it, but we at least like we have a conversation about it. I think that it's much easier to keep sort of bounds around it. Like we're able to keep it to sort of like an maximum like 2 hours of like watching, because it's not in our immediate view. It's something where we have to say, okay, like, do you after dinner, do you want to go watch something? What do you want to watch? Like there's just more friction around it. So that's how we do it. Jake Knapp has a really interesting approach where he has a projector. And so when they want to like watch something, they have to like do this whole elaborate thing of like getting the projector set up in the screen. And so it's like really fun when they do watch something, because it's like a movie, it's like cinematic, but it creates a ton of friction, so that they can't just like flip something on and like let it play in the background.
Yeah, I think that's the key with watching TV, really. Like it's absolutely fine to do, but the more friction you can put between you and the watching of the TV, then in a way you actually enjoy it more when you do it, rather than it being one of those things where you're sort of watching a show and kind of hating yourself for wasting all that time watching a show.
Treat. Yeah.
Yeah.
My camera's gonna die. I didn't properly manage the battery and stuff, so I'm gonna switch my camera just to the built-in
certainly
webcam here.
Oh, is that why your video quality is so good? Because you're using a proper camera?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, that's so clever. Yeah, that's what I'm doing as well. Except I've got one of those like fake batteries that you kind of plug into the mains, so it works quite nicely.
I just bought one of those. I literally have it in a box over there.
Oh. Which camera were you using before?
It's actually, sorry, just 1 second. I need to flip my audio as well. All right. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Okay, good. It's not a fancy camera at all. It's a Lumix FC1000, so it's actually a point and shoot, but it's like, it's a lot better than a webcam.
Yeah, that's pretty good quality. I've got this fancy one that I'm looking at, but then I've got the webcam just above, just in case as like a backup. Backup source. So the other thing that really intrigued me when I was reading this is you've got this laser soundtrack, and I was like, oh, this is sick, because since I was studying for my A-level exams back when I was in secondary school, I've had this kind of instrumental study music playlist, but it's not like it's where I collect soundtracks of like video games and movies and TV shows. So I'll be studying and then suddenly Pirates of the Caribbean is on, or like Concerning Hobbits from Lord of the Rings, or like, the Interstellar soundtrack, and it just kind of really gets me in the zone when I've got this playlist on. And now I've put it on Spotify, and there's like loads of people following it. But what's your kind of laser soundtrack?
I don't have so I don't have like specific songs that I listen to, but it's the same idea. It's the same like kind of giving music that makes you feel a certain way, but also acts as sort of a reward in that habit loop, right? So like you get to like when you're sitting down to like be productive and do the things that you say you want to do, you're getting this reward of listening to the music that you really like. I have a really hard time. Like for me, when it comes to music, I need to listen to things that are not lyrical and don't intrude too much on like the foreground of my attention. Yeah. So I listen to a lot of jazz, and there's a couple of jazz radio stations that I really like. I listen to them on streaming because one's in New York and one's in Portland, Oregon. But I listen to them like through the Sonos, and that's kind of like pretty much anytime I'm doing any focused work, I have that playing in the background.
Oh, that's cool. I'll try out the jazz thing, because I've been looking for like a soundtrack, like a chill soundtrack for the evenings. And sometimes I would ask my Apple Music on the HomePod to just sort of find me a chill piano track, and it usually gets kind of piano covers of pop songs, which is kind of annoying because then I start singing along with the song, and then it's just a little bit distracting. So maybe jazz would be a good one to kind of go for. So the next section of the book is Energize, which is really more about kind of, I guess, recognizing that we are not just like our bodies are not just machines meant to carry our brains, but actually it's important to kind of be a bit holistic about all of this sort of stuff. And so you've got some like really good general advice here, like exercise a little bit every day and snack like a toddler. It was interesting that you had this sort of exercise every day, just 20 minutes a day recommendation. I wonder if like where that's come from, how that's kind of developed.
Yeah. So there is some research on this too. In fact, there's a whole book about this idea that most of the benefits of exercise really come in the first 20 to 30 minutes. The book is by Gretchen Reynolds, who's a writer for the New York Times, who writes about like fitness and exercise. She's really good. Although I can't think of the name of the book, although it might be something like the first 20 minutes. It might be like something really straightforward. But that was like, there's a lot of stuff in the book that we kind of figured out intuitively, and then later we realized that there was actually like some research for it, and the exercise thing is one of them. And I think that the key distinction is sort of between is like, we really think of exercise in the context of building energy. Like, what's the short-term benefit? Because I think oftentimes when we think about exercise or we read about it or hear about it or whatever, it's about some vague long-term benefit, like, oh, you should do it so you can be healthy. You should do it so that you live longer, so that you avoid these diseases or whatever, which are all like really good and important things. But it's very hard to motivate ourselves to do anything because of some like vague long-term benefit. But like you've probably experienced, everybody's experienced, like if you go for like a nice like short run or like a short workout, like before you get to that point of being like exhausted, like you just feel really great, you know, you sort of like feel reinvigorated, like, you know, you kind of get that energy boost. And so our advice with exercise is to really focus it on those kind of short things, because you're going to get that energy boost. You're not going to wear yourself out. It's really easy to fit into your day. And I think if you can focus on doing something small every day, then you can, it's much easier to form a habit. So you can kind of build that habit around a little bit of exercise every day, instead of like that thing that you do once in a while that maybe might be like theoretically better for you because it's like the perfect workout or whatever. But if it's more of a struggle to do it, you're going to do it less often. You're going to have less of a habit around it. So so that's kind of where our philosophy on exercise comes from.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I found that for me, because kind of in this lockdown time where unfortunately like all the gyms are closed, or rather fortunately all the gyms are closed, it's like I started off with like really good intentions. I went on Reddit and the bodyweight fitness subreddit, and I found this like perfect workout plan. I was like, right, I'm going to be doing this every day. But it was so long and involved that I ended up doing it twice and just completely giving up. But then what I've done is that I've put the pull-up bar in the hallway to the kitchen. So anytime I walk through the kitchen, I kind of see this pull-up bar in front of me, and I've hung some of those resistance bands off the end of it. So now I just kind of walk past and, you know, I might as well just do some tricep extensions, or I might as well just like bang out a few pull-ups. Or if I've ordered takeaway, in the time between the takeaway dude arriving upstairs and me letting him in, I've got a solid like 30 seconds. I'm like, right, I'm just going to bang out like 10 pull-ups if I can in 30 seconds. And just like those little bits of exercise throughout the day. They're just quite fun to do because there's such short bursts, and I think overall it just actually encourages me to do the thing, rather than viewing this exercise like, oh, I need to now put aside 90 minutes for this whole long workout.
Yeah, well, and it comes down to friction too. You know, it's like it's the inverse of creating friction around just distractions like your phone, your TV. Like if you want to exercise more, then make it as low friction as possible. Make it so that you don't have to, okay, when do I go to the gym? And it's this whole big commitment, and I got to change my clothes and I got to do all this stuff. If you can make it really easy to do something really quick that is, you know, in your home, in your environment, then you're going to be more likely to do it.
Absolutely. What do you mean when you say snack like a toddler?
This is actually a Jake tactic. And that's something that is, I think, kind of cool about the book, is that we have like most of the stuff we both do or we both agree on, but there's certain things that represent like my personal way of doing it and his personal way of doing it. And he and I have we've actually sort of like argued about this over the years, because we like, particularly when we were running design sprints, we could kind of like create the environment for the teams we were working with. So we would talk about like how often do we want to take like a break so like people can have a snack or like have lunch or whatever. And I don't know why, but like his just like metabolism or whatever is like he needs to be like, he likes to eat a lot, like a little bit, a lot, like frequently. And And so he like thinks of it as like snacking like a toddler, like being like a, like a young child who has to like constantly be eating or they get like really upset. Whereas I'm not like a hardcore like intermittent faster or anything like that, but I've sort of like dabbled in that, and I tend to like I like, health benefits aside or whatever, I sort of like building the resiliency around not having to eat all the time, like being in a place where I know that I can go like all day if I'm out running around or if I'm traveling and things are kind of disrupted. Like I like kind of knowing that I've got that resiliency, that I don't have to be constantly eating and I don't have to be like have snacks in my bag or whatever. But that's an example of sort of like two very different approaches to this idea of staying energized.
Okay, that's fair. The other thing that I was intrigued by was this idea of inconveniencing yourself, especially when it comes to cooking, because this is something that I find really hard, right? So my kind of whole thing about cooking has been like, well, I get home from work at, let's say, 7, 8 p.m. I want to sleep by like 11 so I can get a decent night's sleep. And I've got this 3 hours. Now, in that 3 hours, I could spend half an hour to an hour cooking, cleaning up, blah, blah, blah. Or I could use that time instead to make a video, which would have a sort of 100x return on investment compared to the time I'm spending cooking. And therefore, I might as well spend £10 on a takeaway or something like that. But again, I feel like this is one of those short-term thinking-y type things. And so now I'm trying to think a little bit harder about cooking, but even now I've got there's this like grocery delivery service called Mindful Chef where they give you the groceries in a bag and give you a recipe. But I still kind of feel it's kind of fun cooking if I've got nothing else going on. But if I've got a video that I need to film that day because I've got work the following day, like I don't know, I often prioritize kind of getting a video out and just like ordering a takeaway rather than kind of cooking for myself. So I was intrigued by this idea of like inconveniencing yourself. I wonder kind of if you can elaborate on that.
Yeah, it's sort of related to what we talked about earlier. We talked about how I think a lot of us, especially if we're people who are motivated and ambitious and we have big sort of plans and dreams, we feel like we need to be making optimal use of every single minute. We talked about like listening to the podcast while you're doing something else. Like you've always got to be sort of making the most of that time. And I think that there's a lot of benefits that come from not doing that, from creating this space. There's sort of benefits to your mental and physical health. I think you do a different kind of thinking, a different kind of reflection when you're not, when your attention is not fully occupied. And so this idea of inconveniencing yourself gets at that a little bit. It's really about, it's not about never doing the convenient thing or never optimizing or never being efficient, because, of course, that's ridiculous. But it's about like, it's just sort of questioning what I think has become an assumption, a universal assumption, especially in the worlds of like productivity and life hacking and all that stuff. This sort of default assumption that like you should outsource everything you can. You should outsource your life. You should. Why would you cook for yourself? Like there's no reason to do that. It's not the most efficient use of your time. And so inconveniencing yourself is really about like stepping away from that assumption and saying, well, what might be the benefits of doing it the inconvenient way? And so I talked about some of the kind of mental benefits, and then it actually connects back to the sort of the physical health benefits, the energizing benefits as well. The example of cooking for yourself, the food that you cook at home tends to be healthier than what you might get from a restaurant. It costs less, so that's nice too. And for me, one of the reasons why cooking for myself and for my wife is like one of my favorite parts of my daily routine is that it helps me mark that boundary between like work time and personal time, or like daytime and nighttime, where it's like, okay, I've been sitting in front of this computer for 10 hours, like doing stuff. Like if I want to eat tonight, I got to cook dinner. And so this is going to force me to get away from the computer and like avoid, repetitive stress injury stuff and rest my eyes and, all those things. So that's one of the reasons I like it. But there's another kind of flavor to inconveniencing yourself, which is just moving your body and using your body. And Gretchen Reynolds, who I mentioned, she actually wrote about this as well a couple of times. Like you can get like a non-trivial amount of exercise from kind of doing things the inconvenient way, like carrying like your bags instead of like wheeling them, or like taking the stairs instead of the elevator. And like there's like these little things where it's not the most efficient, it's not the most like optimized, but there might be some there might be some other benefits to kind of doing it the inconvenient, less efficient way.
Yeah. Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, right. So after this, I'm going to cook for myself. I'm going to put a jazz soundtrack on, and then that'll mark kind of the difference between spending all day in front of the computer and then kind of the evening time where I feel like I'm more like. So what I tend to do is I've got Philips Hue light bulbs around the house, so I would turn off my huge ass softbox that has like pure blue light coming out of it, put on these kind of warm glow everywhere, and be like, okay, I'm now in kind of relaxation mode, and then I do my kind of daily reflection. Which I guess, conveniently brings us on to the final kind of segment of the book, the final part of this 4-part framework, which is reflect. What does your kind of reflection process look like?
It's super lightweight, and I should say that I am not like a big journaling person, but I think that we owe it to ourselves to pay attention to our time and how we spent it, because it is finite and it is so precious. And it's funny because like I think we're used to, when it comes to our work or projects, we're used to like being analytical and critical, and we do retrospectives and postmortems, and we look back and say like, well, let's look at the conversion rates and the numbers and like how are things going. But then when it comes to our time, we're just like, oh, what happened to the day? Well, I don't know. Okay, on to the next thing. And so if we can just give ourselves a structure for stopping and pausing and looking back and reflecting, I think that that becomes kind of the mechanism for experimenting, for making changes, and for keeping track of whether those changes are actually working for us. So I do my like reflection routine is literally what's in the book. So we actually have a template in the book that's like, it just has like a handful of questions. I think it's like, I don't know, 6 or 7 questions. You write down your like, what was my highlight for the day? Did I make time for it? Yes or no? How focused was I? How much energy did I have? Yeah, here it is. Which tactics did I use? Like, what did I try to do today to like make time for what matters? Did it work well for me? What am I going to do tomorrow? And then the final question is just something that I'm grateful for. So just like a thing that happened that I want to like sort of remember in a positive light. So yeah, that's what I do. That's what I do every day. And we have been for a long time, way too long, an embarrassingly long time, we've been working on an app, big time app. And that's a whole different story about why it's taken so long. But there's the app. I have like the beta version of the app on my phone, and it actually has that reflect template built in there as sort of like a mini survey. And that's like really nice because I get a notification every night at 7 p.m., which then like reminds me to go, and it's just like a really quick like do the questions, and then it creates like a visual record. So I have like the green check boxes like in a row to show like I made time for it. So that's how I do it.
Oh, fantastic. So yeah, I've been trying to find like the perfect reflection setup as well for the last few years. There's a few different ones I've come across, but the one that I've started doing recently is very lightweight, and I came across it in a book called Storyworthy by a guy called Matthew Dix. Which is all about kind of how to tell compelling stories and things. And this is a guy who kind of goes around the world storytelling as like a performance art, which I didn't realize was a thing until recently. But his thing that he does is called the homework for life, which is kind of homework that you should do every day for the rest of your life. And the idea is that at the end of every day, you ask yourself, what was the most story-worthy component from my day?
Oh, interesting.
And so like I've been doing this for the last like 4 days, but I've kind of made a public commitment on Twitter, of course, that I'm going to do it for the next 365 just to see how it goes. And he says that the benefits of this are amazing. So firstly, it kind of makes you actually reflect on your day. Otherwise, we all get that thing of like, I don't know where the last 2 months have gone, because every day just kind of blends into itself. So now every day I actively think to myself, okay, what actually happened in my day? This is something I do on the app Notion, because I use that for a lot of things, is that I would just kind of write out an outline of the things I did that day, and then be like, oh, actually 12 to 1 p.m. kind of just wasted time on the computer. Whoops. And it just kind of reminds me that was a thing. And then I figure, okay, if I had to tell a story from today, I guess it would be about the chat that I had with John, or about, this patient that I saw yesterday, or whatever it is. So it makes us reflect more on our day. B, it kind of slows down life because now we're reflecting on our day. But C, it also means that if we're in this business of storytelling, which in a way all of us are, like whether or not we're making videos on the internet, or pitching to someone, or even in the dating world, or just being a good friend, like telling a compelling story is such a useful skill to have. And most of us kind of, we what he says is we have this kind of stock collection of like a few different stories that we tell, and then beyond that, we kind of run out of stories because they're just not that interesting. But if you force yourself every day to think, right, what is the most story-worthy component of my day, it kind of stretches that muscle in terms of storytelling.
That's really good. I really like that.
Yeah.
Do you think that it sort of I don't know quite how to phrase this. Do you think it encourages like the Instagramization of life? Like you're always thinking about how am I going to share this as a
interesting.
Like, I don't know. That I would worry that I would always be sort of like self-editing in like how can I brag about this? Kind of like.
No, absolutely. And so that was one of my thoughts as I was reading this book as well. But he addresses it really well, and he says that the author of this book, he's got a lot of stories where he had to have CPR twice in his life because he died and paramedics resuscitated him, and he got arrested for a crime he didn't commit, and all these interesting kind of stories. But he says that actually, that's all well and good, but actually the stories that connect with people are the more smaller stories from your day. Like he tells this really good one about this conversation that he was having with his wife over dinner, which actually kind of was a big thing about his childhood and something that he didn't realize his wife knew about him. And it's like a really tender moment, like a story built purely from a simple interaction over the dinner table. And he says that the stories that actually really connect with people are the ones that the people can, that the audience can relate to in a way. Like, if he were to tell a story about how he jumped out of a helicopter, people would be like, okay, that's kind of cool. That's sort of the braggy vacation type story. Or if it's a story about how, oh my God, that dude got so drunk, I can't believe it. He says, like, no one cares about your drinking stories. No one cares about your vacation stories. What people care about are the vulnerabilities and the stories that sort of they can also relate to. And so that's kind of something that I think about. I'm like, okay, this is not about trying to paint a picture for Instagram. This is about asking, like, what's that vulnerable moment from my day that potentially a lot of people could connect with.
That's so good. Yeah, and I think thinking about the audience maybe keeps it grounded somewhere other than in what I can brag about. Because we can all like we all know, I think intrinsically that our friends don't want to hear us bragging. That's just not like we know that that's not what our friends want to hear, and like we know that we feel annoyed if our friends are trying to brag to us. Yeah. So like if you're going through this exercise and you're thinking about the audience being like, what do I want to tell my friends when I see them next? That probably keeps it away from that sort of Instagram ready type of moment.
Yeah,
that's cool.
I think so. So it's kind of on a similar vein. One thing I've been thinking a lot recently. So I've been reading a lot of these books about storytelling. It's that's kind of a direction I'm trying to go with my YouTube channel, to try and tell more compelling stories rather than just like 10 productivity tips, which is fine. But it's always interesting to be able to craft a narrative. And there's this other guy called Donald Miller who wrote a book called A Million Miles in 1,000 Years. I don't know if you've come across it.
I've read his other book, Story Brand.
Ah, nice. Yeah, that's on my Kindle list to read after Storyworthy. But in
really
A Million Miles in 1,000 Years, he's telling the story about how. So initially he wrote this memoir, but then sort of this Hollywood studio approached him to convert his life into a movie. And he realized that actually his life is boring as fuck, and to convert it into a movie, they had to edit it so much to make it more like a story. And kind of the transformation that he sort of goes throughout this book is this idea of, oh wow, maybe I should be living my life more as if I'm a character in a storybook or character in a movie, like the sort of best version of myself. And the thing that I struggle with that is that I think sort of at face value that does promote a bit of a, what's the most Instagrammable thing that I could be doing with my time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
And so for me personally, I've been thinking a lot about, like from August, I'm taking a break from being a doctor for a year, maybe a bit longer. And I'm taking kind of a gap year. And my plan before the whole virus stuff was to kind of just travel the world and just kind of do cool stuff and meet up with random strangers from the internet, essentially. And I feel like that would be quite an interesting story. But then the other thing that I'm considering is, do I want to potentially do a master's at Harvard or something? Do I want to apply for that? Do I want to apply for a residency program in the US? And those feel like very safe options. They don't feel very story worthy. But then I'm thinking, oh well, am I just chasing this sort of Instagram lifestyle of, oh, check this guy out, he's on a beach in Bali? I don't know. Like, do you have any thoughts on this?
I feel like I have a bit of a perspective to share on this because my wife and I kind of did the take off and do travel the world and live this sort of romantic life, because we, from 2017 to 2019, we lived on our sailboat and we sailed from San Francisco to Key West, Florida via the Panama Canal. Through Central America. And it's interesting, obviously our friends, they care and they want to know, but what I realized was mostly the benefits of that were for me and for my wife. It was the benefits were not in being able to tell these amazing stories, or we didn't really try to merchandise it. We didn't really try to use it as a part of our sort of what we're doing in social media or whatever, although we reference it, but we didn't really go hard on that angle. But the benefits, it's interesting because from the outside, it feels like this thing that everybody, it's oh, people are going to see this and they're going to be so amazed or so impressed or whatever. But what I realized was that most people didn't care that much. But at the same time, it was far more impactful for me in terms of my own identity and my own sort of realization of values and mission than I thought it was going to be. Just having that reset and creating that space on a very, very big level was life-changing. So that would be sort of my, not that you asked for advice, but that would be sort of my advice.
I was very much asking for advice.
Is to don't think, and this is maybe counter to what these books are advising, but don't think as much about the story of it, because the benefits are from the story that you can tell yourself, not the story that you can tell others. And I think that anytime you go through a big dramatic shift, or you push yourself way outside of your comfort zone, you're going to grow. And so anyway, I don't know if that helps you decide which thing to do, but that has been an interesting lesson for me over the last few years.
Yeah. Oh, that's very interesting. Yeah, because the thing I've been thinking most is that, okay, well, my life has been pretty comfortable to this point. Had a pretty reasonable education and went to a decent university, went to medical school. It's a very kind of defined, follow the yellow brick road, and eventually you'll become a consultant and you'll, whatever. But I feel like all of the kind of weird stuff that I've done, starting this YouTube channel, is a bit weird. For example, I had it's always been those outside comfort zone-y things that have always just been the most fun and also led to the most interesting opportunities just randomly appearing.
Totally.
And so when it comes to sort of figuring out, if I had 2 years of my life and $150,000, do I really want to spend those on tuition fees at a random university in America that's basically identical to the UK? Right. Or do I want to do something a little bit more kind of left of field, a little bit more outside the comfort zone? And I'm very much leaning towards the outside comfort zone, just because everyone who does this traveling stuff says that traveling stuff changes them. And until you do it, I guess you don't really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was kind of my trying to figure out what to do with my life thingy. So thank you for the thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I hope you're able to put the plan into action once this pesky pandemic is over.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I've got America on my list of places to visit. So if I ever head down to Wisconsin, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll hit you up if you're around.
Cool. Yeah, you probably won't come to Wisconsin just because there's not
is there not a lot to do there? What about if you're doing that, that famous road trip across America? Yeah. Does that go through Wisconsin at all, or do you have to really go out of your way?
Close. You would go through Chicago.
Yeah.
Chicago is an hour on the train from here, so it's easy. That's not too bad. If you're in Chicago, I'll come visit you.
Oh, sick. I've got some family in Chicago as well, so
really? Yeah.
I'll drop you a message.
Chicago's, it's one of the great American cities. I think it any New Yorkers listening would probably hate me for saying this, but I think it may be a more American city than New York, just because it typifies American culture and architecture and city planning in a way that I think New York doesn't. New York is much more of an international city. It's even from its founding, it was like part of the it was New Amsterdam. It was part of the Dutch empire, and so it was always about like trading, and it was like about sort of its connections to the rest of the world, whereas Chicago is like sort of uniquely American. So anyway, Chicago's cool. It's
fantastic. So there were just two more things I wanted to chat to you about. The first one is kind of selfish. It's again me asking for advice. So so about 6 months ago, I kind of hired my first employee for the YouTube stuff, and now we've got kind of 2 full-timers and 1 part-timer and me. And I don't know, I always I've been trying to read books about like management and leadership and stuff, but have you got any recommendations? I guess you've got experience in kind of managing a team. Like do you have any sort of resources that you'd recommend in terms of learning how to get better at this stuff?
I actually have never managed a team.
Really?
Yeah. I have been in positions where I have like worked, like I've had sort of relationships with people who are like, I guess I was sort of like higher status in terms of the organization or whatever, but they were not actually my like employees or my like direct reports. So that's not something that I've done. I have heard a lot of people say good things about the book Making of a Manager by Julie Su. She was a design manager at Facebook for many years, and her book just came out last year. And I haven't read it, but I've heard from several people that it's good.
Fantastic! Right, I'll be adding that to my Kindle list. And the final thing I wanted to ask about is this highlight course that you run that I've just signed up to. I wonder if you can just kind of tell us a little bit about that and like what's the vibe and what are we going to do over the next like 5 weeks?
Yeah, totally. So, all right. So we wrote this book, and like we've been writing about this stuff online, and a lot of people have picked up this framework, and it's worked for them. And we do get a lot of stories from people saying like this stuff has changed my life. But there's also a lot of people who will say that they have tried a few tactics here or there, and it's really great. But then over time, sort of their old habits take hold again, and they're unable to sustain these new tactics. They're unable to really create lasting change. And so we just started to like think about ways that we could help people create those new habits around these tactics and around the Make Time framework. And eventually that became this course. So the highlight course is a 5-week program, and it basically consists of kind of a dripped out sort of series of videos and text and activities and lessons, very much like any online course, but the timing is such that it's really designed around forming and reinforcing some very specific habits. But then we also have a community. So there's when you join the course, you get lifetime access to the Make Time community, which has people all around the world who are kind of thinking about this stuff and they're experimenting. And that's a place where we not only kind of help give feedback and help solve problems and answer questions for people as they're going through the course, but then like people are sharing stories. People are saying like, oh, here was my highlight today. Jake and I will actually share, like, when we come up with new tactics, new ways of doing things that aren't in the book, we'll share those there. So that's kind of the experience. Is like you kind of go through this, on the one hand, this very structured, like 5-week program of not just like learning what's in the book, but really like fitting it into your day and kind of getting in the day-to-day habit of doing it and making it work for you. But then you kind of have this support system wrapped around it so that you're not on your own, and that even after the 5 weeks end, you're like, you continue to like have this group of people who are all thinking about the same things, all struggling with the same things. Yeah,
like this community stuff is like probably my favorite part about signing up to courses like this one, is that it's very hard otherwise to find like a tribe of people who will care enough about a thing to spend however much money on an online course kind of doing the thing. There was another one I did by Dave Perel called Rite of Passage, which was this like $1,000 course, and then Building a Second Brain by Tiago Forte, this like $1,000 course. And like, yeah, the courses were really useful, but actually the community that you then get access to, and kind of finding other people that also blog about this stuff and are interested in starting YouTube channels and stuff, it's just kind of cool. So I'm looking forward to kind of diving into that.
Cool. And it was like we did not the community was part of the course from the beginning, but we didn't really know what to expect from it. And we actually, in the first time we ran the course, we did weekly live calls, and we thought like, oh, that's gonna really be where the value is. But actually, I don't think it was. I think the value really was from the community, because it's just much more scalable, and it's much more, you can personalize it much more. Like if there's 100 people in the course, like there's no way we can hit all their questions in an hour-long call. But in the community, like people can help each other, and like it scales much better. So after the first run of the course, like the stories that we were getting was like, yeah, this was great. Like the calls were cool. It was nice, but like the community, like that was awesome. So we decided to like kind of double down on that and really make that a major focus as sort of the support that wraps around all of the content.
Sweet. Well, thanks very much. And I look forward to diving into that. And if anyone else wants to sign up, if you look in the video description here, you'll find a coupon code. It's very easy. It's ALILA, and that'll give you 20% off the course thingy. So you can join me on this 5-week program as we trying to work and trying to make time for more of the stuff that matters each day. So yeah, thank you very much, John. This has been really fun. Is there any kind of final ask or anything you'd like to kind of share with the audience? Any kind of message you'd like to go out to the kind of few hundred people who are watching this at the moment?
I think the biggest thing is that you shouldn't do what I say. You shouldn't just do like exactly what I say. And I think this is where so many people go wrong, because they look to experts, gurus, bloggers, whatever, and they say like, what should I do? How do I do it? But the reality is like we're all so different, and we are all our lives are different, our personalities are different, and sure there are some universal truths, but I think the most important thing that I want people to take away from this interview and from all the work that I do is that you need to find a way to establish your own system. You need to kind of get in the routine and the habit of experimenting and trying things, and sort of believe that your time and your attention and your energy are yours to design and to experiment with. And you need to do that, because you can't just do what somebody else has to do. You can't just read a book and follow the steps and your life will be perfect. You've got to kind of take ownership of that. So that's my parting message is like, make your time your own, experiment with it, and figure out what works for you.
Fantastic. All right. I think that's a very good place to end this. So thank you everyone for tuning in. Thank you, John, for taking the time. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, sure.
And yeah, I'll see you in the Highlight Course community, I'm sure.
Yeah, sounds good. Cool.
All right, and take care, everyone. Night, and I'm off to cook some food and to listen to some jazz music. So take care, guys.
Yeah.
See you later.
Convenience yourself. Later.